Welcome to Burning Platforms, our regular look at the politics of technology brought to you by Capita's Centre of the Public Square. I'm Peter Lewis. This week we get a first-hand account of the AI Impact Summit in Delhi with Professor Nicholas Davis from UTS's Human Technology Institute. But first, our wrap on the latest tech news with regular panelist Digital Rights Watch Chair Lizzie O'Shea, who was also at the summit, and Health Engine CEO Dan Stinton. Well, it's been too long. First, apologies for the delay in episodes. We were trying to get Lizzie and Nick to report live from the AI Summit in Delhi, but it was just a bit hectic for all involved. But we're really looking forward to digging into the event, which attracted anywhere between 30,000 and 400,000 attendees, depending who is doing the crowd estimates, which reminds me of my days inflating union rally turnouts. It was the place to be if you were a tech bro, a world leader, or a prominent advocate, and we are so lucky to have not one but two of them here today. So, regular panelist Lizzie O'Shea. Hi, Lizzie. Welcome home.
Thank you.
The great Dan Stinton. Hi, Dan.
G'day, Peter.
And regular friend of Burning Platforms and professor at the Human Technology Institute at UTS, Nicholas Davis. Hi, Nick.
G'day, Pete.
So before we dive into the summit, let's have a look at what's been happening around the broader world of tech. Lizzie, Mark Zuckerberg has finally had a day in court. We know he's a seasoned performer at giving awkward addresses to Congress, but how did he go in front of a jury of his, let's call them peers?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting case. People have probably already heard about this by the time they're listening to this, but it's essentially the first of a whole suite of proceedings brought against Meta relating to product design and the impact on users, including whether decisions they make about how they present the social media environment give rise to addiction and other kinds of harmful behaviour. So this is what is considered a bellwether trial. So it's the first of many to follow. So how it will resolve will be really interesting. Interestingly, a couple of other platforms have already settled in relation to this. So TikTok being one, and I'll tell you about the other one in a second when I just find who it is. But Google and Meta are both proceeding.
It was Snapchat?
Snap, right. Yeah, that's right. Snap and TikTok have settled. Google and Meta are proceeding. Mark Zuckerberg showed up to give evidence, including walking in wearing the terrible glasses that record people.
Yes, the whole team did, didn't they?
The whole team did, yeah, which is contempt. Like, you're not allowed to record in courts for a variety of reasons, which is also pretty telling when these glasses have facial recognition technology and this is in front of a jury. So really asshole behavior in my view, and a kind of classic of the genre, which is here is a set of tech bros walking in defending something and just flouting the law. So anyway, that aside, they were upbraided by the judge, but nothing flowed from that, but hopefully they won't be doing that again. And then the question is, do decisions made by these companies, including ones that we've all discussed many times that prioritise engagement above other considerations, give rise to harm among users? And the general defence put forward by these companies is, of course, Section 230 that I'm sure listeners of the pod will be familiar with, which gives protection to social media companies about moderating content or decisions to moderate or not moderate content, and it gives protection to them in terms of those decisions. But the question here is a slightly differently framed one, which is around product liability, really. It's framing it in different terms, not about whether the content is right to be moderated or should or shouldn't be moderated by a company and whether the court has jurisdiction to make a decision about that, but instead what harms flow from decisions they've made about the design of the space. It's interesting reading about it to think about whether something like this could be brought in Australia. There are a lot of reasons why it would be more challenging, I think. Which will probably come into play in some format or another as this unfolds. So one of the defences put forward is that there are a lot of different factors that give rise to harm among people who use social media. Social media might be one component, but it may not be the sum total or the sufficiently causal factor to hold the company responsible. So there's a real question around this, especially where evidence around how social media is experienced by people is quite mixed, and there may be quite distinct individual characteristics that don't necessarily also occur at scale. So those causation questions, I think, are the place in which the defence will really lean into this and say that it's not their product, it's many other factors that give rise to harm. And I think there's other bits and pieces that they might seek to argue, but it may also be that this matter resolves once the companies get a sense of how the jury is responding to some of these claims. Like, it's quite clearly a different time than it was 10 years ago, when some of the arguments about individuals' use of these platforms might be more able to be defended as being one of individual responsibility rather than attributable to design choices by the platform. I think we've observed now lots of years of bad behaviour on their part, and the public may treat this differently. So it's possible we'll see how this unfolds, or it's possible we won't, because they may resolve these proceedings if they
There's something
lose.
like 1,500 similar cases lined up, aren't there, Lizzie?
Yeah, that's right.
So what's the worst case scenario for Meta out of this?
They get a verdict that's pretty clear, even for this individual, but that gives you an indication of how this might apply at scale. So not confined to the individual circumstances, but have broader application, that they are responsible, that they knew of the harm being caused, and this has given rise to a clear set of harm that can be identified and compensated, right? So if they got a decision like that, that would be pretty bad. And this is the question they're
So
going to have
why
to
aren't they
contend.
settling?
I think they can disrupt this with arguments about causation, with other kinds of arguments that they don't prioritise engagement. So it may be that they try and put forward that claim that the evidence of harm was unclear, so they were making the best decisions available to them. I mean, some of that becomes a bit difficult as there's a habit, it seems, of individuals within Meta raising concerns about potential harmful product design and then them being overridden. And, like even recently we saw documents come out talking about how, they had to have a 95% confidence that the account was a scam account before they'd take it down. Now, I don't know whether people will think that's reasonable, that kind of requirement to meet very high thresholds before they contemplate that this prompts them to take action. That is a habit within the company, it appears, and so you have to question whether the jury will accept that's that kind of high bar to clear before you do something about harm that might be being presented to you as an executive is good enough.
Dan, you run a tech business. The idea of accountability for decisions you make. How are you watching this case? You're obviously no Mark Zuckerberg yet, but
yes, yet's being the operative word there. No, we also run a very different company that doesn't obviously amplify harmful content. So
yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
This, I mean, Lizzie, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like a pretty novel and potentially really significant case if it is one or found against Meta, right? Because it kind of challenges the protections that Section 230 brings, I think, if I've understood it correctly. So tell me if I got this wrong, but effectively, the plaintiffs are treating Instagram as a defective product, right? And they're basically arguing that the algorithm and the infinite scroll, these are design choices that make the product inherently unsafe for users, right? So, and I think the fact that TikTok and Snap have settled, by the way, is quite telling. But I think maybe the stakes are just higher for Meta. If they
sure.
settle this case, then it could really open the floodgates for a whole bunch more, like all those cases that you mentioned before, Pete. So, but it seems to me, I mean, Section 230 was obviously never designed for algorithmic amplification, right? It was designed in, I think, 1996. It was to shield platforms from hosting user content when they were sort of bulletin boards and not much else. But this is now saying that if you are effectively amplifying harmful content, you do actually have a responsibility to the user. And that feels pretty sensible to me. I mean, this is a thing. People have argued for a long time, not just me, that Section 230 should give platforms protection for something that users post. But if you are making choices around, effectively editorial choices around what content is getting amplified and shown to people, I mean, that's entirely the company's decision, right? Like, that's not a free speech issue. That is on them, right? So if they were to lose this case, it feels to me like this would be pretty significant. And just in the context of Australia, I mean, Lizzie, tell me if I've got this wrong, right? But Isn't Australia arguably ahead of the curve here? Because with the Online Safety Act makes platforms accountable for user safety in principle, doesn't it? Whereas yeah, isn't that a superior model? But you tell me. I mean, you're the expert on this, obviously.
Well, I don't think the Online Safety Act doesn't facilitate individuals suing for harm, right? Like if you want to sue and say you've created a platform and it's negligent because it causes harm, you would need to clear a certain threshold, because there's injury thresholds in Australia in almost all states. So you have to have a certain level of harm. You have to have probably a diagnosis, right, associated with, and it would have to be causally related to the design features you're talking about. So the other way, Meta may lose, but it may be confined to this person's individual circumstances because she was particularly susceptible. So only people who are particularly susceptible might be, there's a number of different ways it could go. They don't have to lose and it be catastrophic. They could lose and it could be okay and confined. They could lose and it's catastrophic, or they could win, right? And it could just say this causational evidence is too hard. The science is still emerging. It's not clear what gives rise to this kind of harm. Is it really an addiction? Like, these are evolving fields of social science, right? So there are a lot of challenges in bringing proceedings like this, just on the straight causation point. And you can understand that. Like, this may be one component of what gives rise to harm, but there may be many other factors in individuals' lives that make them particularly susceptible to forming kind of harmful behaviours, whatever it may be, as a result. Like this, the person in question is alleging pretty serious consequences associated with addiction to platforms from a young age. But, like, I imagine there's going to be a lot of work done by the defence to pull that apart.
The other advantage Meta have, though, is that their algorithm is, again, completely opaque, right? So this is the only company that really knows how harmful their algorithm is Meta, right? And which
is exactly why, in addition to this kind of litigation, let's see what happens, but you're asking people to take a pretty significant risk. And in Australia, they'd be on the hook for costs of the other side if they lost. What you actually need, I think, is regulators who go and ask for this information and ask for regular reporting, much in the way that they do in places like Europe, to go, if you know about a harm being caused by your platform, what are you doing about it, right? Like, you can do this without forcing individual plaintiffs to bring these claims as test cases and have their experience raked over the coals through their testimony, their expert evidence, and the like.
And Nick, this feels like, from where we are now, almost ye olde worldy. This is old social media in the dock. How does this translate into some of the discussions you've been having around accountability around the impacts of AI? I'm thinking particularly the next step is obviously, companions in your ear giving you information, which I know is also the subject to lots of, terrible instances, which will inevitably lead in court as well.
Yeah, no, look, it was particularly interesting in India last week, in Delhi last week, to hear Kratsios from the White House's Office of Technology Policy saying, we in the US, we completely reject global governance of AI, but at home in the United States right now, state by state, I think last week there were 4 bills passed out of committee across different states, a number of which dealt with AI companions and the obligations of platforms and offerers of those services, including around manipulation, mental health, disclosures, and addiction. So, Virginia, Washington, I think there was a really interesting Oregon bill that passed the Senate last week that that says that the provider has to have a procedure in place to address suicidal ideation, self-harm. So a lot going on at the state level in the US at the same time as we have this kind of, where Lizzie and I were last week, this kind of orgy of opportunity in the AI space, kind of contrast with this increasing recognition across jurisdictions of the importance of really managing and putting some harder and faster rules and indeed liability around keeping people safe.
Well, we'll get back to the orgy a bit later, but I do think you've just given me the title of this week's episode, so thank you, Nick. I might jump the queue with my little curio this week. It's kind of almost a continuation on this theme around accountability. So, really interesting piece of legislation that's made its way through the New South Wales Parliament. Under changes to workplace safety laws, employers are now explicitly required to ensure that digital work systems, including algorithms, AI, and online platforms do not risk the health and safety of workers. Businesses must now specifically consider if their digital systems result in excessive workloads, unreasonable performance metrics, or discriminatory practices. And here's the twist: unions will have a formal right to require, quote, reasonable assistance to access and inspect digital systems where there's a suspected safety breach within 48 hours. So a couple of points to note here. First, and I've been involved in this over the decades. New South Wales workplace laws have been at the forefront of tech regulation for decades. In the late 90s, we introduced workplace surveillance laws, which put tight controls on video surveillance in the workplace. Then in the early aughts, these were expanded to include the interweb, including workers having the right of privacy over their emails, including union-related activity. So you can see how far things have moved in 20 years, but those laws are still on the books. Second, this is the first time that the employer's general duty of care under OHS law has been applied to AI systems, I think anywhere on earth. I've been attracted to this as a mechanism for regulating AI because it places the onus on those deploying the tech to do no harm. And rather than having prescriptive regulations on fast-moving technology, it creates general obligations. So it's also worth noting OHS laws are the reason we don't have smoking indoors in Australia. It was general liability of employers, not public health measures, that made smoking untenable. So I guess the challenge now is to apply these rights in real workplaces. And Lizzie, I know you spent time recently with some unions at a forum convened by Nick's team at HTI. Do you see opportunities for this law to actually be an active game changer here?
For sure. So I think there's going to be a requirement to upskill people so that those inspections can be done in a way that is meaningful. But I think it is very exciting to see this kind of proposal put in place. Like we had recently, I think Nick was also at this event, Chrissy Lynch come out from the AFL-CIO talking about their approach to introducing regulation that is designed to support employees in the workplace when it comes to AI. And they were quite keen on this. Like a lot of the things they were proposing were very similar in the sense that you're giving unions the right to inspect it. You're not relying on some third party. They're doing it from an OH&S perspective. This is a good thing, right? So I think it's a really exciting bill. I would like to see Victoria introduce it because nothing gets Victorians going more than New South Wales having something better than us. So I'm very happy to leverage that for our own purposes. But I don't know why we couldn't start introducing this in other states. We will have to find ways to make sure people can do this in a way that is meaningful. But that's a good challenge to have.
Nick, you do a lot of work with company directors around their duties and obligations. Surely this sort of principle makes your work more compelling at a board level.
Always. Look, obviously company directors are particularly worried about exposure to work health and safety laws because that cuts through to boards in ways that other obligations often don't. So this has been, a big discussion amongst the AICD and the other kind of business groups that were pretty exercised about this digital work systems bill. The thing that I'm most excited about is that I think it's the amendment at 276, which was the review clause to say the New South Wales legislature anticipated that Safe Work Australia might update its rules to make this a kind of one of the common standards in work health and safety. And so I like that that kind of anticipation of alignment here. That hopefully this will not just go to Victoria and the other states, but will become one of the standard clauses for WHS across Australia in those common rules.
Dan, the business lobby is up in arms, as is the Australian Financial Review, about these laws. But I guess the other way of looking at it is if you create these standards, it knocks out the bottom feeders. So what's your initial reaction to placing that level of obligation on companies on the way they deploy systems?
I mean, it seems pretty sensible to me. I would note that that's not a common view with people in my position, and it's contrary to the TCA, for example, as well, who have argued against this. And look, their argument has some justification in that it will absolutely slow down the deployment of some of these
dangerous
systems.
AI. Yeah.
But, the trade-off that comes with that is that as these systems are deployed more and more in the workforce, you can have greater confidence that they're being deployed in a way which is not going to be, against or harmful to employees or worse, right? So I think if I've understood it correctly, and again, I'm no lawyer, I'm not across the specifics of this, but I've understood it correctly, it just seems to me to be applying the same standards that we would apply to a manager to an algorithm. And given that, workplaces, such as mine, but many others are increasingly automating systems because of the capability of the tech is just going up and up and up. I think it is incumbent on people who are running those organisations to make sure that the systems that they are deploying are fair and safe and, not surveilling their workforce unnecessarily and all those sort of things. So, look, it will slow down a little bit, the pace of the implementation of these things. I think that is a fair point. But in my mind, that's a trade-off that seems pretty justified to make sure that we maintain fair and healthy workplaces. So I think I'm broadly in support of it.
But I don't know if you know the answer to this, but if algorithms are opaque, how do you actually, how does this can observe how an algorithm works? It's not going to be able to observe the algorithm, is it?
I mean, I'm not sure. It's a right to inspect, right? So what that looks like is going to have to be interpreted in some way in practice, but that might be, depends what you mean by an algorithm, I suppose. I don't know anyone's going through the code, but I think there's a right to understand in a accessible format what decisions are being made and how, and you've got a right to inspect. So that is looking under the hood.
Nick's done something that no one on this podcast has ever done before and politely raised his hand. So, Nick?
Yeah, just to say that the regulatory object here is allocation of work allocation. So the goal, as stated, and it may be interpreted more widely, but it is about systems that are parceling out kind of jobs or bits of work. Now, that could be it could be interpreted as a huge range of different AI systems. If you've got an automated system that's sending emails saying, hey, Dan, can you do this? Hey, Lizzie, can you do that? But at the moment, most AI systems used in corporations kind of, in say, certainly white collar workforces don't come into that that category. Whereas, shift allocation systems really do. As do kind of job and gig style allocation systems. Just to say, I do think that the chat in the general kind of in the ether has been a bit. This is all AI, but while they haven't done, I think, an amazing job at completely specifying what work allocations is, I think it's reasonable to think this is really about ensuring that people are not disadvantaged or taken, abused or discriminated against in how work is allocated, and in terms of the how onerous that work might be in terms of then psychosocial harms, work health and safety. It's a little bit narrower than all AI is suddenly open to union inspection.
All right, we better move on. If people are wondering why Dan's looking a little bit pale and stressed on the video feed, he has been living the SASSopcolypse, which has been a result of Anthropic's latest AI release. What is the SASSopcolypse and why is it keeping you awake at night, Dan?
Look, it's not normally a story which I would bring to burning platforms, which, it's more of a business story than anything else. But the reason
this is a group therapy session as well. So.
Yeah, well, maybe it's just to make me feel better. But the reason I want to talk about it is because I think it has implications which are not being talked about as much, which is a bit more a topic that we would talk about on burning platforms. So, yeah, the SASSopcolypse, a lot of listeners will have heard this term already, but effectively, this came about because we've had about $1 trillion of market cap wiped off the value of SaaS companies, particularly out of the US. And as you mentioned, what triggered this was the launch.
Sorry, for listeners that aren't regular, what is SaaS?
SaaS, software as a service. So these are companies like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Adobe, companies that charge you a monthly fee to use their software. And, most companies now have literally over a couple hundred of these that they pay for every month. So it's a very big part of knowledge work and how sort of typical companies run, particularly tech companies. So what triggered it, as you touched on, was the launch of Anthropic's new model, Opus 4.6, and particularly the tool that sat alongside this that they released at the same time called Cowork. So it's effectively taking the automation that we have seen the benefits of in coding and software development and applying this to more general knowledge work. So It just basically means that you can automate a lot more things that you could previously. So to give you a couple of examples from my own experience, I've had to do a whole bunch of financial analysis on parts of our company and other companies and the like. I would typically have given that to someone on my finance team. I can now give that to Claude Cowork, and it does it at a very, very high standard. And 3 months ago, when I have experimented giving this kind of work to ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude previously, it did not do it to a very high standard at all, and it was a bit of a waste of time. So it really is, at least in my anecdotal experience and certainly in most people's experience that I'm reading, a step change in the capability. Now, look, a couple of business points, and I'll get to why this matters for us, right? So it came about basically because company valuations of SaaS companies have typically gone down by about 30%. And it's happened because SaaS companies have a business model where they typically charge on a per seat basis. So what that means is if you're Salesforce, you charge a number of salespeople that are using that software. And the trigger of why the valuations have gone down is not so much that this software isn't valuable, it's increasingly valuable, but it's more that the business model doesn't make sense because you can automate more and more jobs, as I've just talked about. And as a consequence, you might need to have less and less salespeople that are using the software, and therefore your whole financial model is kind of busted, and you need to sort of start from scratch. Now, of course, this is what I would say, but I think software SaaS companies are safer than ever, can do more things than they could possibly do before, can offer more value, solve more problems for companies than they ever could before. And so I think provided SaaS companies are able to move their business model, I think they're going to be fine, or at least the majority of them will. But here's where I think it matters for us, right? There is a real change that is taking place in the automation of jobs, as I've touched on. So the fact that these companies have lost 30% of their value basically because less people are going to be using them, that is a sign that there is going to be less people employed. And really that is the point that I think is going a little bit missed with all of this, is that lots of people, including Anthropic's CEO and others, have been warning about the coming unemployment.
A third of entry-level jobs gone.
Yeah. And I think we're starting to see this, right? So it hasn't really showed up in a macro level in the data yet, but, Salesforce shed 4,000 workers recently. Amazon cut 16,000 workers. There's lots of data that suggests that particularly entry-level jobs, which are the kind of jobs which are more junior, and you typically would, the things I've mentioned before on this show just a moment ago, you typically outsource the more junior members of your team. They can now be automated, and so the need for more junior people is going away. So I just feel that this is now, we've talked about this as a theoretical job killer in time. I think we are now at the point where we're going to start to see this show up in the data really, really quickly. And it just doesn't seem like we're having much of a debate about that as a society around what we're going to do if people that are graduating from university or coming out of high school and wanting to go into knowledge work, which is the vast majority of the economy, are unable to find jobs. And I think we are going to be approaching that world in 2026, not in 2030 or 2035, as we've previously had assumed. And I think that has massive implications for us.
So all those careers advisors that said just go code, they're going to have to change their advice to just go clean or something? Like what?
Well, so I heard an interview recently with the head of Claude Code, which is probably the dominant coding software available. My team use it massively. He said he does not code at all anymore, and his team does not code anymore at all. He literally just creates software by prompting it with human language. And that fundamentally changes the way you build software now. And, anyone can do it. Literally anybody can do it. Having a technical understanding will certainly help, but we're going to fundamentally change how software is created.
Nick, what's your take on all this? Like we sit in a lot of discussions, that talk about the upsides and also the need to regulate for negative consequences, but this is more societal.
Yeah. Look, first, I think most of the noise in the market about layoffs is a complete beat up and a distraction, and it's people cutting headcount that they already wanted to cut. They're not replacing, by and large, with agents. That productivity effect that Dan is talking about is real, but it's not well distributed across most organizations at all. So there is a leading edge here of anticipation in the market, driven by, I think, investor jitteriness and general uncertainty in the market that I think is clouding the picture. Having said that, it doesn't mean that this isn't coming. I just think we're not actually seeing any of the real picture in this yet, because when you look at the productivity stats at the organizational level, like at the firm level, let alone the macro level, Dan, It's just not there, right? Within teams, we are not seeing, and across organizations, in most organizations, and yours may very well be the exception that kind of proves the rule, we're not seeing this kind of net reduction in work. We're seeing actually a work intensification as people genuinely take on more things at the edge of their workloads. And a case in point is Claude Code, for example, is a fantastic, and I think, it's been job changing for me in some parts of my work just in the last month and a half. But it's pushing me and many others to do things that are totally not in my job description. And productivity wise, there is no way at the moment that I would let myself go or any of my team members go. In fact, I'm actually pushing out into more areas. And that brings me to the second kind of key point here, which is this idea of the Jevons paradox, right? Where things become more efficient, demand expands. We know that in all the areas that all the SASSopcolypse is getting hit, particularly legal services, some financial services, some kind of CRM, collaboration for the case of Atlassian. These are areas where, we need more of it in society. You need better teamwork. We need better healthcare. We need better financial advice. We need better legal advice. There is a massive, more Australians get legal advice from their GP than they do a lawyer like Lizzie. So there is a massive shortfall here in providing people in society with, goods and services that really increase kind of well-being. And so what I feel is we are going to make this shift, and it is going to be painful. There's going to be this jitteriness, partly because we have other economic uncertainties like tariffs and climate and other things going on that create a lot more noise than I think we expect. But in the meantime, I think where we're going to is actually a world of teams really focusing on some of these human elements. And I don't want to induce a crisis by claiming that it's here already. I'd rather that we say, look, let's kind of be really careful about that signal and noise and understand that there is still, as you said, Dan, there's still a huge amount of value in being able to get data together and do accounting data in a way that Xero offers that Claude Code never will, because no one else wants to try and replicate that kind of security and stability of that system. So in this, I kind of urge a little bit of not too much doomsday thinking and not inducing the very future that we fear.
Are you as upbeat, Lizzie?
I find it hard to judge, of course. From my own personal experience as a professional provider of legal services, I do wonder about, for example, the future of the extremely crowded AI market for legal products, because I do wonder whether the capacity created, which I agree there's going to be some lag, so I understand Nick's point there, but the capacity created is that businesses might be able to create bespoke solutions for themselves that are obviously a lot cheaper, than a Swiss Army knife legal AI product that can translate documents into 20 different languages, that can upload 2,000 documents and analyze them for you, which may be unnecessary for a large number of legal service providers, for example, but you may have specific tasks that you think can be automated, and you can now experiment with potentially doing that yourself. So I do wonder about some of that market starting to also be impacted, which is not as perhaps SASSopcolyptic as how Dan was framing it, but it does have an impact on how those kinds of startups that may have also had an acquisition strategy now may not even have that available to them. So I do wonder how that's going to be impacting that sector of the economy. But then, of course, it'll take quite a bit of time, I think, for people to understand how some of this potential that exists with these tools can be translated into their enterprise. I mean, I would say, though, this is the thing that I think a lot of people really thought large language models could do well, compared to lots of other uses that had particular problems. But creating code was the thing that it is potentially the really good use case. So I think it is worth thinking about how this could transform your business if you're in this sector. But you know, there may be pitfalls that come from being locked into using one provider for the purposes of this kind of coding too. So, you know, like there's a little bit to play out, I think, before you can make definitive predictions, judgments.
But to round this out, Dan, if this particular application is wiping immense value off companies, where does that fit? Like, does that make them more productive, or does it make them just poorer companies? Like, again, is it just a concentration of value from a whole bunch of SMEs into the big large language models, or what am I missing here?
I think if a company does not, if a SaaS company does not evolve its products to have a significant AI component to it, then I think they're going to be in trouble. And that means that the SaaS companies will need to develop new products which can automate more jobs and solve more problems that were previously only solvable by humans. And I guess that's my point. So, Nick, I think I broadly agree. Well, I think I agree that we're going to have a massive productivity gain from this technology as more and more people can do more and more things. But I think it's an and, not an or. I also think we're going to see particularly junior level jobs. I mean, obviously, lots of people are saying this, right? This is no great insight, but lots of junior jobs in particular are going to be gone very, very quickly. And also, what I'm particularly concerned about, and this is, look, maybe I'm too online for this, and I'm more concerned than I should be with what I'm reading and listening to. But the capability of the models versus even 2 months ago is so much better that if it keeps accelerating at this pace, it won't just be the junior level jobs that are going to be exposed. It's going to increasingly come up the levels of seniority within the organisation. So the junior level jobs going out is bad enough, right? But I just think it's going to be a really unsettling time, because we're going to have a massive productivity gain at the same time that I think we're having.
But no one's modelling the cost. No one's modelling the cost. They're modelling the upside, but not the downside.
Yeah, and this is kind of my point, I guess, is that I just think previously I had assumed that the impact of this on unemployment was going to be several years away. My prediction, and I hope I'm wrong, but my prediction is we'll start to see this showing up this calendar year. I think it's.
And maybe can I just say that I do feel like we might be approaching this kind of megapixel moment in AI, right? The kind of moment in the mid 2000s where no one cared about megapixel counts in cameras anymore, because all smartphone cameras were good enough to take a great photo. That probably happened around 2010 or so. Pretty soon, like the raw capability to model is not going to be the thing that people talk about anymore. It's going to be the leap that Anthropic made in the last couple of months, which is, you know, now I can run Claude Code, like I can send 15 agents running simultaneously through VS Code and doing lots of amazing kind of agentic things, writing directly to my hard drive, while I'm at the gym, so to speak, right? That is incredible. And that was the first time in the last couple of weeks that I had this moment of maybe Dario's right. Maybe it is 50% of knowledge workers in this, in the next 6 months or something, because I couldn't have imagined that workflow capability coming together so quickly. And the actual capability of the model isn't the thing that's exciting me or the thing that's scaring me, really. It's how you can orchestrate these things to actually do multiple tasks. And that's that seat compression thing you were talking about. You no longer need 15 sales agents to do that together and build a marketing plan. You can have the virtual agents do that. So I also agree with you, Dan. This is scary as I'm really betting my optimism on the fact that it also expands demand at the same time.
So I feel like you're starting to remove your shaved coat to enter the orgy of opportunity, Nick. So maybe that's a good setup to talk. Like, was this the discussion going on in Delhi? Why don't you share with listeners who probably have only seen out of their corner of eye the images of Modi triumphant and Altman and Ahmadeh refusing to clasp hands together, which felt like the sort of meme of the conference. But what was the event, what was the vibe, and what comes out the other end? And then obviously Lizzie can sort of yes and a lot of this, and we'll throw it over to you guys.
The India AI Impact Summit was the fourth in a series of nationally sponsored, nationally hosted summits that started at Bletchley Park in 2023, I think it was, where the UK government hosted an AI safety conference. We had a meeting. There was a meeting in Seoul the following year. Last year, it was renamed to the Action Summit in Paris, the AI Action Summit in Paris, hosted by Macron and Modi was there. And then this year,
Ed gave us his impersonations earlier this year.
So you can tell just by the renaming of this that it's moved from safety to action, kind of just a bit more general term, to impact, which is again this kind of, I don't know, this kind of some form of just spreading out and kind of making less tangible in many ways what these kind of national discussions are focusing on. And that was made very clear from kind of like probably the biggest innovation of this year, which was the Indian government opening up the tickets to, I think for free, Lizzie, to anyone that wanted to register. Over 150,000 people, I think even more by some counts, registered. And on days Monday and Tuesday last week, it was like a Glastonbury kind of flashback in Delhi, where you just could not move amid expo halls and exhibition spaces and AI panels. I spoke on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I have never experienced anything like it. The room was standing room over, people pushing to get in, the doors opening and closing, with people wanting to hear, basically people that had been on the AI scene for a little while, including me, saying the same things about safety and governance and the need to support inclusion and human rights. The kind of pressure and interest and engagement was incredible. What I'll say before I hand over to Lizzie is, though, I was on a couple of panels on governance and safety and speaking about kind of rights. I think people like Lizzie and I were the exception. Most of the panels and most of the people there were really focused on that question of how do we use this? How do we see this as a big opportunity? And if you look at the Delhi Declaration, which is the document that 89 countries signed on Thursday, it really focuses on the idea of spreading the value of AI through adoption and uptake, and very little about anything to do with either the doomer kind of existential risk discussion, which is where this started in Bletchley Park 3 years ago, and also not really focused on the question of how people, like everyday people, are getting harmed and discriminated against, and whose lives are being changed often for the worse because of the reckless or the malicious use of these systems.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. So to give you a micro example of exactly that, I made a point of going to a session on AI and children and child safety. And one of the reasons I wanted to go to that session was that I think it was the head of global public affairs from OpenAI was there. And so I thought, this is going to be an interesting litmus test to see how these conversations are going. And much to my frustration, there was no discussion about like the kind of product liability questions we were discussing before, like whether these companies would be held to account for potential harms arising. In fact, the way the OpenAI rep was treated was applauded for OpenAI having an approach to young people that involved creating an experience for them. And so if OpenAI deduced that someone was below 18, then they would have a different interface for them that was designed, that presumably had some guardrails. Like very little was said about what the actual underlying difference was, but presumably it had some guardrails to protect them from certain kinds of content. So applauded, like as in other panelists were like, this is great that you've done this. So that is largely what the discussion was about. And, at the end of the panel, there's no time for questions, like there's no kind of sense of accountability. So the way these things are structured are not in support of that form of public accountability for industry, even though industry is there and running around doing a whole bunch of meetings with a whole bunch of state reps. So
what was the balance of power that you felt between the tech companies and the governments, out of interest?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question, and it sort of depends on which state you're talking about, I think, to some degree. So there's a lot of discussion in some of the communications and certainly the presentation put forward by India that there was supposed to be a reframing of AI that might suit the global south better. So that includes things like diversity and encompassing language inclusion, for example, which has largely been off the table for a long time in terms of how industry responds to these kinds of requests, right? So some of that has been reshaped by nation states like India taking a trying to do that, trying to reshape some of the industry's priorities to suit them, because they know they're a booming market. It's unclear whether they're a global south country or a middle power country. Like, I think they were described in both terms in the time that I was there. So it's finding its identity as a potential market of for AI users. So the industry knows this and is shaping how they are responding to this particular moment in light of that. So having said that, there's obviously many ways in which industry is being courted by states to through investment, through paving the way for them to operate in countries and making industry making demands about regulatory environments. Like, part of the big theme here I certainly took away was also that a lot of companies were trying to make out that they are doing the work to make their products more inclusive, safer, that this is not necessary for states to concern themselves about. It's not explicitly said necessarily in those ways, but I think that's part of the purpose of this forum as well, for industry to put forward that kind of claim.
Nick, the other line that was running through some of the reporting I saw was about the ideas of sovereignty, different nations having control, although it was interpreted as another product the big tech was selling, like sovereignty in a box, rather than genuine discussions about building Indigenous sectors.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a general pushback actually against the idea of sovereignty as being ownership of the stack. The US in particular, in Kratsios's speech on the main stage, was saying, "Don't be stupid. Like, don't wait. Don't go out and do your own thing and fail. Adopt our tech stack. It's really complex. You want to be with us." That was the kind of key message of his work. Other kind of thoughtful leaders from the global south, like Philip Tego, who's the Kenyan ambassador, was pointing out a number of times that sovereignty doesn't have to mean complete ownership, but it does mean agency. It means having some form of control and choice and optionality. And that was going back into that kind of small states, middle powers, alignment. What are the alternatives? We don't want to get caught. You know, the kind of subtext was, we don't want to get caught between a choice between China and the US. We want to be able to construct our own sets of resources in ways that don't get us, as in a kind of Manichaean system as that would suggest. The other kind of thing big takeaway that I had was I really worried about the level of visibility of civil society across the board in the main summit. There was a fantastic day on the research symposium with academics that I got to participate on. We had Dario and Sam. You know, I call them by their first names because they're mates now, obviously. They were on the main stage, refusing to hold hands, literally alongside and seated next to heads of state and government. That's a change. That feels different. So you had researchers, you had industry, you had the obviously a lot of ministers from and at least two big heads of state, but in terms of civil society, they were there. They were incredibly well organised. There was an absolute cornucopia of fantastic side events managed by places like GNI and others, but they were by and large pretty absent from the main program, which was, I think, a pretty lost opportunity given that those calls by India for things like inclusion and making sure that the kind of social benefits of this are shared.
I would just say, though, oh, sorry. I would just add one point, which is how, like, civil society, how I use the term is sometimes a bit different to how I think you do, Nick. So it just is, we're saying, like, when there weren't like lots of advocacy or campaigning or grassroots organisations there at all, right? So that's worth saying.
You've gone from being the only digital rights advocate in Australia to the only one in the world, Lizzie.
There was you, there was like Ada Lovelace and others who you would probably put in that category. HDI I put in. I mean, obviously we're at a university, so you can put us in the academic bucket. But there were relatively few, weren't there, Lizzie? Like in terms of like, and let's be honest, Amnesty can't visit India.
No. Right. So, but this is also a question for me. Some of the objectives and audiences for these kinds of summits remain a bit unclear, and that's something that's going to unfold over time. I wondered whether it might end up being a bit more like COP, where it's an opportunity for grassroots advocacy organisations and human rights organisations to start organising alongside the negotiations that take place. But that is not like what it looks like it's heading towards, right? It looks like it's going to be a state dialogue where industry is involved, and to the extent civil society, defined broadly or however you choose, is really going to have to muscle its way into the agenda. Yeah.
Dan?
Look, the conversation's probably moved on, but nonetheless, I'll go back to it. Can I ask no, it's more just I wanted to pick up on something that you said earlier, Nick. So I think I know the answer to this, but that photo that I saw with Dario and Sam Altman and Modi with their hands in the air, I didn't see, I think it's Liang Wenfeng there or any of the Chinese model people on that stage. I gather they weren't as present in anything that you saw?
No. So Chinese New Year was a big clash for the organisers, and in the end, I think there was one Chinese state official who made it in. So not a huge representation that I saw. There may well have been a bunch of kind of backroom or sideline conversations, but certainly not as visible as you would have thought, given that given how advanced they are in the ecosystem.
So the reason I'm asking this, right? I mean, it's probably obvious, but it picks up on what you were asking before around sovereignty, Pete. So, Nick, I think last time you were on, we spoke about this, and if I recall, you weren't suggesting that Australia go and build their own model, which might just be the pragmatic approach, and it might just be ridiculously expensive, too expensive for us to contemplate. But it still seems to me that this problem is unsolved, right? Because you're still then really building either on Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, or if you're really game on Grok, or X, but I think, if you don't want porn turning up in your business-to-business software, you probably don't want to be using that model.
It is an orgy of opportunity, Dan.
It is an orgy of opportunity. This is true. Lizzie's getting more and more horrified the more you reference that. But anyway, but then there's the other alternative, right, is that you build on these Chinese models, which are opaque and obviously under the control of the CCP in some, at least technically. Whether they are in practice is another question. And it does feel like an even worse situation compared to where we were. I mean, Pete, you've been advocating for Australia to have its own, or there was a while there where you advocated for Australia to have its own version of a social media platform, potentially run by the ABC or something similar, which, was ambitious, but obviously a goal that is going to be pretty hard to pull off. This feels worse, right? Because we're going to have businesses and consumer products which are built on top of these models. And we really don't have sovereignty over this. We really don't have control over what is happening. And I'm not sure that, the conversation that we had at the time, last time you were on, if I recall, Nick, we were talking about sort of middle powers like Australia and India, although India is fast becoming a major power, sort of getting together and trying to create some sort of shared common interest about this. But you're still building on top of models which are controlled either by the US or China, right? This is a fundamental problem, which I think is going to become a bigger one. Am I worrying unnecessarily in your view?
Well, so this is a really big question in the security community about open weight models. So since we last spoke, I think the big shift in open source, that at least the one that struck me the most, was the Swiss government with ETH Zurich, EPFL, and others created a completely open source model called Apertus. And Apertus is, they trained it fully pre-trained it from the ground up using kind of validated input. The inputs are still a little bit messy, but they tried to exclude all copyrighted material as best they could. It's pretty good. It's not quite as good as Llama 3. It performs pretty well, but it is highly aligned with Swiss languages, Swiss culture, all that kind of stuff. And they showed that they could do it at a relatively low cost. Like, they didn't have to spend billions to get what is a kind of maybe 18 month out of date open source model. They can get something that is highly aligned and, as secure as they are able to make it, because they know everything that went into it, right? Mm. You can take a Quen model, a Kimi model, a DeepSeek model, which is like an order of magnitude kind of better in lots of different tasks, kind of thinking model, and you can download it into it's a large file, but it's something like 70 gigabytes for some of these quantized versions. They are not connected or controlled by the CCP. By and large, these are developed by small Chinese firms that don't have people sitting on the board, who are from the party and others. They are genuine entrepreneurs. You cannot guarantee that hidden somewhere in that training data, there isn't some awful stuff that could create code that harms Australian interests or, your company and my company or my organisation's interests. So you can't guarantee that. But they're open source. It's just a file with the weights, right? So I again, going back to that megapixel moment, I do feel like there are ways forward where we don't have to just wholly give over to being sucked into either a proprietary model from the US or building our own completely from scratch. We could probably do something similar to what Switzerland did and get a pretty good model. But I'm also quite excited about just learning from these Chinese open source models because, publish a lot of information about them. You can download the weights, you can test the crap out of them, and they are really good. So I feel like the degrees of freedom are a bit greater than many people think.
Should Australia do that then? Should the Australian federal government pay for us to develop a version of what Switzerland has done?
Yes, but I would say that the trick with that is I would be worried that they would do it a little bit like they've done with some quantum investments, and they would just give like 100 or 500 million to one organisation to do that, which I think is really risky. I think it would be better to actually distribute the job across a number of unis and researchers and say, let's get the guys from ETH Zurich who have actually visited Canberra and talked parliamentarians through the Apertus model. But yeah, do something like that. But again, it's not to get the model out that you do it. It's to learn what is good and how to do it and to be part of that stack and that capability. Because if you are using it for a national security purpose, a critical purpose, you probably do want the best you can get. And you probably do want to be able to have a partner through Five Eyes or through our kind of trading partners that at least for some period of time, it is kind of really top of the line. And to do that, we may be in the same way they are with other defence issues. We may be with our...
Hasn't that argument been run and won with AUKUS, though?
But isn't this part of what the argument was around the Productivity Commission report, for example, that there was all this talk about potential benefits from deregulation, but there wasn't any discussion about investment? It seems like one of the problems with the Australian government is they understand investment in AI to be running trials, essentially purchasing products from companies like Palantir, companies like OpenAI, rather than investment in local researchers to do what you're describing, Nick. Do you think that's a fair criticism of the current approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the investment should be for capability expansion and optionality rather than the thing, right? I don't think this should be like AUKUS where you say we're going to spend it to get a sub. I think what we need to do is we need to have a really well-regarded, tightly integrated, super expert group of mathematicians and computer scientists, data scientists that can actually construct at the frontier of these things. Because I tell you what, there's still a long way to go. Even just that workforce integration piece, being at the frontier of that to benefit Australian government and business and citizens would be freaking amazing. And let's get ahead of this.
I feel like a few people have a hard finish and it might be time to bring this orgy to an end. Any final thoughts or reflections on the discussion, guys?
Non-consensual orgy.
But isn't that what India was, really?
I don't want to keep going with this metaphor. Yeah.
Better.
Yeah, it feels to me there's a lot of work the Australian government could do to change our position for the better, but it does require a bit of bravery, and that's spending of money as well as purchasing of products. And I wonder how much longer this can kind of go on for in this format before we lose the chance to have a meaningful role to play in how this tech will be rolled out in our economy. So I do remain a bit worried about that.
Dan?
Yeah, similar. I would love the government's come a long way on AI in ways that you guys don't like largely, but which I've broadly been supportive of. But what I think we haven't done is we're not really encouraging what you're advocating for, I think, Nick, which is some of the expertise on this very frontier tech to be developed locally and to stay in Australia. And I think my sense is, and this is just a hunch, right? But my sense is this is going to be something we're going to regret, and I'd love to see us investing more in this and the Australian government nurturing this more, perhaps along the ways that you're suggesting, like in a fairly diversified way. But it feels like we're missing a trick here by not being part of it.
Mm-hmm. Nick?
Some of the most interesting and up to date influencers, YouTubers focused on the use of things like Claude Code are young Australians going hard at this. Let's not sit around and be, just happy with what's offered in Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT or even DeepSeek. Let's build all the supporting ecosystem. Maybe we will get to the opportunity, but by goodness, let's not do that to the exclusion of still taking care of people, because all those risks we started talking about today are still there, and we don't want them to be systemically entrenched.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Let's put a pin in it. Thanks a lot. We'll be back in a fortnight with another Burning Platforms. Thanks, everyone. You've been listening to Burning Platforms. It was recorded on February 24 and produced on Naarm land by Rebecca Cornell.